What if I ask you this question? What if I say Technician A, and these Technician A and B questions, the reason we do those is because Technician A and B questions are all over the ASE tests. So if you ever take an ASE test, you better get used to these Technician A and B questions, because it's like two questions in one, and the ASE folks really love this, so you're going to see a lot more of them. Technician A says sooty deposits may be the result of improper engine operating temperature. Technician B says sooty deposits result from an engine running too hot. Which one of those guys is right? Somebody talk to me. I know some of you guys know the answer to that. Think about the 350 we got on the stand over there that's got the carburetor on it. What's the first thing that happens before you ever turn the key when you tap the throttle? What does it do? Mr. Blunt, you're usually pretty sharp about that kind of thing. What happens when you tap the throttle on the 350? On that one over, it's got the carburetor on it. What happens?
It revs up.
No, if you're before you start it, you tap the throttle. Why do you have to tap the throttle?
To put gas in it.
And there's something else that happens too. You got to wet the manifold. That's right. But what else? There's a zillion people out here that's driving that have never ever had to tap the gas before they started the vehicle, because we've got no tech starting now, and they don't have a clue. But if you, on that 350, if you were driving a vehicle with a carburetor on, you've all done it. When you first start it, you tap the gas, the choke closes, right? The choke closes because in order to run and stay alive, it's got to run richer when it's cold than it does when it's hot. Okay, within 90 seconds, that choke should be at the vertical position, and you should be running it, you know. Well, what does that on the fuel-injected engine? To begin with, what wets the manifold? When you're spinning it over on a fuel-injected engine, you get extra pulses on your fuel injectors. A lot of people don't know that, but you do. It's firing them all at once, like pop, 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 like that. Also, whenever the engine is cold, the pulse width is expanded. You see, like, remember what? How many of you remember looking at that scope when you see the pulse like that, and it snaps up like this? See that? This is the pulse. This is the 12 volts that's coming. You're measuring on the side of the injector where the computer triggers it. Okay, this right here represents how long the injector's open. If you make this wider, just think about this as a bucket. You know, that's deciding how much fuel you're dumping in there. If you make that wider, you're going to be putting more fuel in there. If you make it narrower, you're going to be putting less fuel in there. Whenever the fuel injector is released, the magnetic field that collapses goes sweeping across those copper windings, and it creates a 50-volt spike. Did you know there was a bunch of 50-volt spikes coming out of your fuel injectors every time they operate? Most people never even think about that, but there is. You see it on the scope. And if you set that thing lower than 50 volts, you're not going to see the top of that spike. Well, anyway, the point is, look at the question now. Sooty deposits can be a result of improper engine operating temperature. If the engine coolant temperature sensor tells it it's too cold, you're going to have more pulse width. If it actually is too cold, the coolant temperature is just going to report that. You're going to have more pulse width. You're going to have sooty spark plugs. Sooty spark plugs have been running too rich, right? I'm talking about the dry, sooty-looking, puffy stuff, you know, that looks, not the wet stuff. Now, if you got enough gas going in there, it'll look wet. But if you're just looking at the little sooty stuff, and I could, you know, point the camera over there, but everybody's seen a sooty spark plug. I mean, I'll show you a picture of that. If you see a spark plug that's snow white, then that is fairly common on most of the cars nowadays because they're running really, really lean. If you see one that's a sort of a light tan color, like what Brett was talking about the other day, he says, what about those spark plugs here? Because there's a light tan color, and those spark plugs, that looks normal, pretty much. Used to, before all of this stuff really got hot and heavy into emission control, you could look at the inside of the tailpipe and it'd be a tan color just like that. Nowadays, a lot of times it's white. Sometimes these engines run so clean that you could do the white glove test and you wouldn't get anything on your finger, particularly the electronic power stroke diesels. You know, the ones that's got the common rail fuel system on them. They got other problems, but if you look at that tailpipe on the inside of it, you don't see a single particle of soot. Well, of course, I got a particulate filter too. All right, I took longer on that question than I meant to. Sooty deposits do not result from an engine running too hot, so that one is an A, right? Technician A is right. Sooty deposits may be the result of improper engine operating temperature. Technician A says radiators should be checked and serviced when the engine is rebuilt or replaced. Technician B always replaces the water pump, thermostat, and rubber hoses when reconditioning an engine. Who's right about that? Both of those guys are right. Fellas, this ain't rocket science. Let me tell you this. How many, if you stay in this business a while, sooner or later, you're going to see where a plastic radiator split without warning and destroyed an engine. And if my deal is, and this may sound kind of dumb, but my deal is, why not go to the little bit of expense of putting a radiator in it at 120,000 miles? Makes good sense. I typically do it on mine, did it on my Jeep. Because I've seen cars, I saw a Cadillac sitting beside the road with an old couple driving it one day. It was a beautiful, perfectly running car that they thought everything was okay on until the radiator tank split and it fried the engine. And all of a sudden they had a boat weight there.
Yeah.
It was an older car, had a lot of miles on it. But if they'd have dropped a radiator in it and say 120,000, that car would have still been going down the road instead of splitting the radiator all of a sudden. And it'll do that. Those plastic parts will give way. Any other plastic part, if you're reconditioning an engine, any of the plastic elbows that carry water, any of the rubber hoses, the belt tensioner. The belt tensioner likes to pop without warning too. I've had that happen on, and you don't have any idea when that's coming. They'll just break. And all of a sudden you got no belts. You see, I'm backing out of the driveway one morning on my 95 Ford Taurus, and I had a pretty good few miles on it, but the radiator had been replaced on it too. Pop, all of a sudden I got no power steering, my alternator light's on, and I'm not spinning the water pump either. The ones that are really bad are the ones that throw the belt that's driving the water pump, but everything else is still spinning. That's not good either, is it? Okay, so that's going to be both of them. That's going to be a C. For each gallon of fuel used in an automobile engine, how much moisture is produced by combustion? How much? He said 1 gallon. B. You're making a gallon of water for every gallon of fuel you burn. And you can see that in the in those winter mornings when there's steam coming out the exhaust. Or you see it on a brand new car. It's right on this lot out there. You can go out to any car lot out here you want to. You can fire up a brand new car and you can see water come dripping out of the tailpipe. You ever seen that? See water come out the tailpipe and you think, what's the sound of that? Sometimes they'll have some stuff that it washes off the inside of those brand new pipes, and it'll actually have a green color and make people think there's antifreeze there or something. I've seen that before too. But you're going to see that. Low engine operating temperatures will cause all of the following except what? Accumulation of water in the oil, rust formation, cylinder wall wear, or what? Actually, they all are symptoms of low operating temperatures. There was a guy one time that gave me a 302. I was driving a 74 Ford pickup, and he had a 76 Ford pickup. And when he pulled the dipstick, he would see water in the oil. Little droplets of water on the dipstick. And the dipstick actually was starting to get a little rusty. And so what this guy said was, he says, why don't we just put an engine in this truck? Because he said, I know it's got something wrong with it bad if it's got water in the oil. And so he had somebody pull the motor out and put another motor in it. And he gave me the old motor. Well, my old truck was already giving some trouble. I mean, it was knocking whenever you would go into it. It wouldn't knock when you let off and let it coast. It would knock. I mean, it was making knocking noises, and I knew it was a matter of time before I was going to put a motor in it. And whenever it had cracks and pistons that were cracked and all that. When that stuff finally gave way, I was about halfway between Sabine Pass and Port Arthur, and that truck started laying down a smoke cloud that was so heavy that when cars would go into it, they'd hit their brakes. You know what I'm saying? Imagine your truck putting out that much smoke. When cars went into that smoke cloud, they hit their brakes because they couldn't see through it.
It's dodging Corella. It's like I'd be going up and down the road and just see exactly where
Well,
you're
that one, when I switched that one off, it never started again until I took that 76 Ford motor, it's a 74 model Ford pickup. I took that 76 Ford motor and I dropped it in my pickup truck. And the reason that it had water in the oil, now this is pertaining to this question, so listen to me, was because he had took the thermostat out of it. Because he thought cooler is better. Well, it's running too cold, that water condenses in there, the PCV system stops working right because it gets clogged up with sludge. You wind up with a whole bunch of condensation in a crankcase, and you can wind up with sludge about that thick. Or if you drive it short distances, if you crank it up here and you drive it down to the store a mile away and you drive it back, and Grandma does that every day. Let's say Grandma's driving a Camaro, right? And it looks like a brand new car. And you want to buy that thing, man, that thing's got to have a lot of miles left in it. My brother-in-law did that. He bought a car that was a mom and pop car. It was so sludged up. And the first time he drove it to Birmingham, all that sludge broke loose, got down in there, started the oil pump, locked the motor up. And it was a one-owner car, a little over 100,000 miles on it. It was an Acura. Just ruined that motor. $1,700 you had to pay for a motor for that thing. But anyway, it depends on how the car has been driven. You know, if it's been driven like, you know, on I tell you, the car I like to get is the traveling salesman's car that's always been driving down the highway 70, 80 miles an hour. That's the one that's in the best shape. Even if it's got 400,000 miles on it, it's going to be in better shape than one that Grandma and Grandpa's drove from here to the, you know, and all that. But, all right. So, all of that stuff is symptoms of low operating temperature. That one is going to be a D. Okay, let me hit you with this. The following statements are correct except what? A, operating temperature is too high will increase metal-to-metal contact. B, operating temperature is too low will thin the oil. Now, how in the Sam Bill can that happen? C, operating temperature is too high will cause detonation and pre-ignition. D, operating temperature is too high will cause sticking valve lifter plungers. That is question number 5. The one that's wrong, it says, the following statements are correct except operating temperature is too low will thin the oil. Now, the reason that that I take a little bit of issue with that question is that if the operating temperature is low enough and it runs rich enough, the extra gasoline that's being put in there will go by the rings and it will thin the oil and it will get a lot of gas in it. Technician A says the thermostat is most often connected to the radiator inlet. Is that right? Is that right, Brett Bowers?
That's right.
Technician A says the thermostat is most often connected to the radiator inlet. Technician B says the thermostat is most often located on the bottom of the engine. Who's right? Well, actually, A is right because most of the time it's on the radiator inlet. Have you ever seen a car that the thermostat was on the bottom of the engine? I have. I can tell you one. Actually, a couple. Oldsmobile Alero. The thermostat is way up under the bottom next to the oil pan. Crazy. On the 2.7 liter engine, so you see in these Chrysler Sebrings, the thermostat is on the side of the engine block behind the AC compressor. Down there, you got to pull AC compressor to get to it. But you would think, just looking at the engine, that the thermostat is right up there at the top. Okay. All right. The following statements are correct except, all right, number 7. The radiator inlet is usually at the top of the radiator. The water pump usually connects to the lower radiator hose. Is that right? The radiator outlet is usually at the top of the radiator, or the thermostat usually connects to the upper radiator hose. All of them are true except. The outlet's not typically at the top of the radiator, it's at the bottom. It only makes sense for it to be. All right, now you know your old Model A's didn't have a water pump. What they did was they percolated the water and it would go up and then it would drain through the radiator and then go back into the engine and it would cool it that way. They didn't pump the water. You got to keep going. All right. Which statement is true regarding cooling systems? A, heat transfer explains how radiators work. B, thermostats are rated according to the temperature they're fully open. C, radiators are most effective when the coolant's closer to the temperature of the outside air. And D, removing the thermostat is a good way to solve coolant system problems. Which one of them is true? Well, you're not going to solve coolant system problems. It's not a good way. You may make it run a little cooler for a while, unless it's an old Mustang that's got a real thin radiator, then it'll make it run too hot. That only happens on about, one car in 500. But a lot of people, there's hard-headed people out there that say, if you take a thermostat out of a car, it'll always overheat. Well, that's hogwash. Most of the time it runs too cold. Yeah, it can, but usually it won't. Heat transfer explains how radiators work. 8 is supposed to be an A. Now, see, Hunter, if I just let you wing it on this test, you'd be crashing and burning. You don't want to crash and burn on this test, do you, Hunter? Everybody's getting something out of this. When testing thermostats, Technician A uses a pyrometer. It says the engine side of the thermostat should be the hottest spot on the cooling system. You know what a pyrometer is? Temperature gun. You just go measure the temperature of it. Get my little laser. I mean, you can call that a pyrometer if you want to. Technician B says incorrect ignition timing may be the cause of engine overheating. That's number 9. Engine overheating can be caused by incorrect ignition timing. Late ignition timing can cause an engine to overheat. And number 9, actually both those guys are right, because you can use a pyrometer. I got it designed that way. Technician A says you must completely drain coolant before replacing the thermostat. Technician B says the defective thermostat is always the cause of an engine not getting hot enough. Who's right about that? Technician A says you got to completely drain the coolant before you replace the thermostat. Is that right? You don't have to. It's right up at the top. You're going to lose a little bit, but you don't have to drain the cooling system. Technician B says defective thermostat is always the cause of an engine not getting hot enough. Now, anytime I see a question that says always, I typically caution people against saying that's the way it is, because one time I had a guy that was emailing me, and he was struggling with that, and it turned out, and I'd like to do a detailed study on this one, but he said that he finally figured out that he had his serpentine belt routed wrong. He was spinning his water pump in the wrong direction, and for some reason it was making some sort of a little cavitation there where the coolant sensor was, and it was causing it to read too cold, which was strange. But typically, if an engine's running too cold, 99 times out of 100 it needs a thermostat. So the right answer to that one there is that it needs a thermostat. So 10 is going to be B, right? Which mixture of antifreeze water solution is generally recommended for general automotive use? 30-70, 70-30, 100-0, or 50-50? 50-50. Put 100% antifreeze in there, you're liable to bust a head, because it turns into jelly at 8 below 0, okay? What color is the antifreeze that causes organic additive technology, that uses, I'm sorry, not causes, organic additive technology, that's oat, right? That's C. Orange. You've seen the orange antifreeze. 13, what's the correct pH rating for hybrid organic additive technology antifreeze? 3, 7, 15, 11. What's pH? What's normal pH? What's water?
No. 7.
7. That's right. Water's 7. Exactly right. So the correct pH rating for hybrid organic additive technology antifreeze, HOOT, is D, 11. All of these are functions of antifreeze except A, cooling system lubricant, B, rust inhibitor, C, corrosion inhibitor, or D, all of these are functions of antifreeze. I don't like the way the questions are written when they do that for you, but all of them are the functions. D is the right one. And technician A says air with a wind chill below freezing will cause water to freeze in an engine block. Technician B says wind chill will not affect freezing point of coolant in an engine block. Who's correct? B. In order for an engine to freeze and bust, an old mechanic I worked with, back in '77, I worked at a shop in Enterprise, and the old guy that owned the shop said that from what he had been able to tell in all of his years in the field, the temperature, even if you just had clear water in the cooling system, the temperature has to get to 26 degrees and stay there for 4 hours to freeze and bust that block. So if it's going to be 30 degrees tonight, I'm not saying don't put antifreeze in there, but what I'm saying is if it really gets down in the mid-20s and it's going to stay there, you got something to worry about. Right? You need to do something with it. So, all right.
You got a pen knife on this?
Not, well, I don't, I've got the one in my pocket. Hold on just a minute, maybe it'll find you.